How to change colors in knitting. Hi everyone, my name is Norman and today's video is all about the best ways to change colors in knitting. How to switch colors in the middle of a row or at the beginning. I will also show you quite a couple of different ways to improve the color transition, because when you are knitting ribbings or in the round or even garter stitch, it's not only about the technique itself. The spot where you join in a new color and the way you knit across the first row or round is equally as important. If you are not careful, the transition will become very visible. So let's dive right into it, but before, please like this video right now to support my work. Part 1. Changing colors, the technique for simple flat projects. The easiest way to change colors in knitting is with a simple knot here at the beginning of a new row on the right side. So pick up your new color, the color you want to join, and then tie a simple knot around your old yarn. And then slide that knot here all the way to the base of the first stitch. Then pick up the new yarn and start knitting across any way you like and according to your pattern. And that's already it. Later on you have to undo the knot. Undo the knot because it's quite visible in your finished project. And then you have to weave in the tail the regular way using a sharp tapestry needle. That's the way I always do it for stockinette stitch. And then I go one more time in another direction. Frequent viewers might know that I actually prefer a different method called twist and weave, where you don't have to undo any knots. So what I do is I pick up the new color, the color I want to join the regular way, pick up my work, and then I insert my knitting needle into the very first stitch. Then I place the new color in between these two needles and secure it with my thumb, the tail. Then I cross the tail of the old color. Then I weave the tail of the new color here in between those knitting needles. Then I wrap the working yarn around the needle counterclockwise as if to knit, and then I bring the tail here around in between the needles one more time, and I pull down, and this will create a stitch here on the needles, and then I pull through. Make sure that you don't accidentally create a yarn over. Pull tight and then continue knitting. Let's do it one more time in slow motion. As you can see, the advantage of this technique to change colors is that you can use it anywhere in your knitting and not just here at the edge. It creates a very stable first stitch, so perfect. By the way, I am using these new knitting needles for my video. They have these sort of translucent tips, and I hope this enables you to see my stitches even better. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I think they are very pretty. I'll also put a link in the description in case you are interested. A lot of you have asked me how to change colors in a purl row, and if you want to use the twist and weave method, you have to do it like this. So insert your knitting needle into the first or the next stitch purl-wise. Then bring the tail of the new yarn in between those knitting needles. Then you have to bring the old tail over and under. So you are twisting the tail around. Then you wrap the yarn around the working needle as if to purl and bring the tail around and pull down. And then you have to purl that stitch through. Tighten up and continue knitting. So let's do that one more time in slow motion. Tighten up those tails here and continue knitting. You will have to weave in the tails the regular way later on. I'll link you to my full tutorial on how to weave in tails up in here. And if you don't like weaving in tails, you can also use the weave in as you go method. So you pick up your new color, then you knit one stitch, pull tight, the first stitch will be loose, and as you knit the second stitch, you bring the tail or both tails and cross it. Then you knit one stitch, and again you cross these tails, knit one stitch, cross, and you continue doing this for around 6 or 8 stitches depending on your personal preferences or how fussy your yarn is. And once you are satisfied, I'm doing 6 here, you simply continue knitting. This method to join in a new color will be totally invisible here on the right side. On the wrong side, of course, you will create these very visible floats. On top of that, it will only work for slightly fussy and feltable fibers. I wouldn't actually use it for this cotton yarn. But for a non-reversible project, this can be a great choice. On top of that, you can combine it. So you use the twist and weave joining method here in the middle of a project, but instead of using a tapestry needle to weave in the tails later on, you weave them in as you go in the next row. At this point, I want you to know that these 3 methods I just showed you are certainly not the only way to change colors in knitting. They just happen to be the most viable and versatile ones in my opinion. Still, I'll link you to my full tutorial with 10 different ways to join in a new ball up in here. For now, I want to focus on something entirely different and just as important. Part 2, changing colors with more advanced knitting patterns. So this here is a stockinette stitch, and as long as you stick to switching colors at the beginning of a row, you will always end up with a super smooth transition here on the right side. The wrong side will always have this one row where the 2 colors kind of bleed into each other. But since stockinette stitch is not a reversible pattern, that typically doesn't matter a lot. Whenever you are knitting garter stitch, which is a reversible pattern and looks exactly the same on both sides, then you absolutely need to make sure that you only change colors in a right side row. If you started your project with a long tail cast on, this is typically the side where the tail hangs down on the right side, but you can simply place a stitch marker on either side and call or define this as your right side. Because here on the wrong side, you will always get this bleed through, and that's probably not what you want. So here for this little swatch, I joined in the green yarn here on a right side row, and I get the bleed through here on the wrong side. And if I want to join in a new color, another new color, and I would do it on the wrong side like this by simply knitting across, this is what would happen. See, you will end up with bleed through here on the right side, whereas this transition is perfectly neat. So whenever you are knitting garter stitch, stick to switching colors only on the right side. For stockinette stitch, it doesn't matter. You might remember here we switched colors on the purl side. Still, the transition is perfectly nice and neat. The problem arises when you are knitting more complicated knitting stitch patterns, for example ribbings. If you just knit across in the new color, then you will get partial bleed through here at these rib columns. Now, there is no feasible way to totally avoid this. However, you can choose to knit across one full row of knit stitches. So you don't knit in pattern. You would normally purl these purl ridges. Instead, you knit across. You knit across one full row and then you continue the 2x2 rib stitch pattern, in this case the normal way. And if you do it like this, you end up with a color transition that is a bit more consistent, at least here on the right side. On the wrong side, it is of course even more noticeable. So it is a trick best reserved for projects knit in the round like socks or hats. And so, I mean, it's a compromise. So if you pull things apart, you can see the knit stitches. So it's probably not the best technique for small stripes either. I leave it up to you which version you prefer. I personally feel this little bleed through is often not very noticeable either. The very same trick can be used for basically every other knit purl combination as well, or for example reverse stockinette stitch. A lot of very sensitive knitters prefer princess soles for the socks, so where the smooth side here is on the inside of the sole and the purl side on the outside. And if you want to avoid a bleed through, then you simply knit across. So I would typically have to purl across this right side row of the reverse stockinette stitch, but in this case I'm going to simply knit across. So this is the result. You don't end up with any bleed through, just one row of garter stitch here in between, which is not very noticeable. On the wrong side, however, you end up with a very pronounced and noticeable ridge. I'm showing you this because sometimes when you can't blend two tones together, when you can't hide things, then you might as well go for a ridge like this and call it a feature. It can actually look quite stellar for the right kind of pattern. Part number 3, projects in the round. So what happens if you're knitting in the round and there is no edge and you absolutely need to change colors in the middle of a row or round? Well, you can still do it with the twist and weave method I showed you before. So switch colors with the exact same technique and continue knitting. The problem, however, will arise when you start the second round. When you are knitting in the round, you are actually knitting in an upward spiral. And this means you will always end up with a little step here if you simply knit across the second round. Not very pretty if you ask me. Instead, here's what you need to do. First of all, never join a new color at the beginning of a needle. That stitch here is prone to creating ladders, so always do it in the middle of a needle. You can shuffle stitches around if your pattern relies on a specific start of your round. And then you could join the new color here with the twist and weave method, or my personal favorite method I call weave and twist. So one stitch before the color change, I place the tail of the new color in between my working yarn and my knitting needle, and then I knit one stitch. And then I twist the two yarns around two times, pull tight, and continue knitting with the new yarn. And that's already it. And when you come to the start of the next round, instead of knitting across, you lift the right leg of the stitch one row below back to your knitting needle. So lift that back and then knit it together with the adjacent stitch like this. And then continue knitting. Let's show you that one more time. And I'm going to do this here in the middle of the needle. So you lift back that right leg back to the knitting needle and then knit it together with the next stitch. Of course, I'm going to unravel this here. See how much neater this transition is? You just end up with this one elongated stitch instead of a very visible step. Another way to avoid this jog here is called helix knitting. So it's a very smart technique. Since you are knitting in an upward spiral anyway, you might as well use it by knitting with two colors at the same in a kind of DNA-like double helix. So you knit one full round in color A. So one full round here. And then you join in the next color any way you like. So I'm doing it with the twist and weave method again. Weave and twist, sorry. And then you knit across one more round, or one full round. However, you don't finish that round. Instead, 3 stitches before the end of the round, you stop knitting and you slip those last 3 stitches purlwise. And then you pick up the old color again. And then you start knitting across in the old color. Just one round. And again, you will stop 3 stitches before the end of that round. So here I am, 3 stitches before the end of the round. And again, I will simply slip those 3 stitches without knitting them. And then I pick up my new color and start knitting across one more row. But in this case, one more time, I stop knitting 3 stitches before the end of that round. And basically you continue doing this for the rest of your pattern. And one last time here, 3 stitches before the end of that round, I slip all those stitches and pick up my red yarn. Again, as you can see, I'm not trapping any floats here on the backside. So I'm just picking it up without crossing, and then I knit across one more round. And if you continue knitting in that manner, you will create this utterly seamless double helix without a jog. Only here at the very start, you end up with one little step. Comment below in case you want me to record a full tutorial on helix knitting, because you can knit it with more than just 2 balls to create much wider stripes. And I'll link you to my full tutorial on jogless stripes up in here as well. Part number 4, blending colors into each other. The methods I showed you so far all create very nice but somewhat stark contrasts. And for some projects, you might want to blend 2 colors into each other. In these cases, you have 2 options. Option number 1, knitting fair isle. So you join in the new color, but in the first row you only knit every 4th stitch in the new color. So 1, 2, 3 stitches in the old color, and then 1 stitch here in the new color, followed by 1, 2, 3 stitches in the old color, and 1 here in the new. I'm using a knitting thimble here to knit fair isle, but of course you can use whatever technique you prefer. And in the second row, you knit every 1st and 3rd stitch in the new color, but you start counting here. So basically you alternate between the 2 colors. So 1 in the new color and 1 in the old color across the whole row. And here in the third row, you only knit the very first stitch in the old color, and then followed by 3 stitches in the new color, 1 in the old color, and 3 in the new. And knitting purl with cotton is, well, very interesting. And in the fourth row you can drop the knitting thimble and start knitting across in the new color, or purling in this case. And of course, if you feel like it, you can weave in this tail as you go. And in this way you can blend these 2 colors here into each other, kind of like a U-shift. Of course, this is just one example, and you could stagger this across even more rows. There is only one problem with this technique, and so many patterns seem to ignore the basic fact that stockinette stitch and purl knitting create fundamentally different fabrics. Stockinette stitch is quite stretchy, while purl is rather solid and not stretchy at all. So whenever you transition from stockinette stitch to stranded knitting, you have to go up at least 1 needle size so your fabric doesn't contract, and you can already see this happening here a bit. However, stranded knitting is best done with relatively small needles, or a small needle size, so the floats don't peek through. So it's typically better if you go down a needle size for the stockinette stitch instead. Instead, you can also knit stripes. So you start by knitting 1 row in the new color, and then you pick up the old color and start knitting from the other end, kind of the way you would, knit 2-colored brioche. So you knit across 1 more row here on the right side, and then you turn your work around and knit across, or rather purl across, 1 row here in the new color, and then once again you slide the work back. So you need double pointed needles or circular needles, or you are knitting in the round anyway, and then you purl across 1 more row in the old color in this case. And then you turn around again and knit across 2 rows with the new color. And after these 2 rows in the new color, you knit 1 more row in the old color. And let me tighten this up. And your tail will end up here on the left side, but you are not going to continue knitting with that color anyway, so it doesn't matter. So you knit across, slide things back to the right end, and then you continue knitting with only the new color. So I added a couple of more rows, and this is the result. Again, this is just one out of so many ways to use stripes to blend colors together. The advantage of this method is, of course, that this color transition is as stretchy as the rest of the fabric, whereas purl will constrict it. Anyway, that's how to change colors in knitting. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your questions and your feedback, and of course, don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.